Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am Harry Lausenis, and this is my YouTube channel, grecochess. And we're going to continue the coverage of the New York State Chess Championship that took place about 1.5 weeks ago in Albany, New York. This is round number 5. If you've seen the previous videos, I started with the wins at rounds 1 and 3 and losses at rounds 2 and 4. So I have 2 out of 4 points, which means very few chances to be at the top, but also very few chances to be at the bottom. And now, let me share to you first the announcement of the tournament. It is the 147th annual New York State Championship that is divided in various sections. If you want to become the New York State Chess Champion, you need to participate in the championship section and, of course, win more points than any of the other players. There is one small detail. You must also be a New York State resident. Otherwise, your champion will be the New York resident with the highest number of points. But to participate there, you had to have a rating of at least 1900. And my rating being 1582, I needed another 318 points to qualify. If not, you could participate in the under 2100 category, the under 18, that's where I participated. And below me were the under 15 and the under 1200 categories. Time controls, first of all, there are 6 rounds. See here the rules, 6SS means that there are 6 rounds. Every player plays a total of 6 games. Round number 5 that I'm going to show now took place on Monday, September 1st, 10 in the morning. It started, and at 3:30 in the afternoon would be the last round. Time control. What does this mean? You must complete your first 40 moves in 80 minutes, otherwise you lose out of time. If you can do so, and if the game continues, then to whatever time you have saved, the remaining time you can add another 30 minutes, and you must complete all of your remaining moves in that time. Good thing is that when it's your turn to play for the first 30 seconds, the clock does not move. You will only lose time if you need more than 30 seconds to play a move, and only the remaining after the 30 seconds. But your time should never reach 0. And now let's give a look at my opponent. Who was my opponent at round number 5? His name is Sathiesh Arunagiri. His rating is 1539, and he's in the 84.7 percentile, meaning he's better than 84.7% of the members of the United States Chess Federation. Compare this with my numbers. And of course, these numbers are before the tournament started. I have a rating of 1582. And I'm in the 86th percentile, meaning I'm better than 86% of the members of the United States Chess Federation. What does this mean? It means that odds were on my side. But this doesn't mean too much. All that matters is what happens at the chessboard. And we're going now to the chessboard. This is the chessboard of chess.com. On the left half, you're going to see the situation of every move. I'm going to enter the moves one by one until the end. On the right half below the word analysis, you'll see the computer evaluation with positive number, meaning white is better, negative means black is better. The computer will show every move if it was the best or not, and if not, which would have been the best move. And will also show the best 3 options of the other player. And I start with my pawn going to e4, so queen and bishop are free to move. Opponent plays a symmetric way, pawn to e5. Usually the most popular move is the Sicilian defense. Pawn goes to c5, but also e5 is a very popular one. The aim is to control the d4 square. And I place my knight on f3 for the same reason. My opponent places his knight on b6. Everything around the square d4. And now I occupy the d4 square with my pawn. This is what's called the Scots game. It is one of the three most popular moves at that point, the most popular being either the bishop goes to b5, the Spanish opening, or Ruy Lopez, or bishop going to c4, the Italian opening. And Sathiesh takes the pawn at d4. And now, the most popular move and expected would be the knight to take the pawn at d4 and continue with the Scots game, but I decided to surprise my opponent by sending my bishop to c4. This is called the Scots Gambit, and it is very tricky. Black needs to know exactly how to react. How did Black react? How did Sathiesh reaction? How did Sathiesh react? He plays his bishop on c5 in kind of a symmetric way. Not a bad way, but the best way would have been to place the knight on f6. My knight goes to g5, and I threaten a fork on threaten to win the pawn on f7 and the fork on queen and rook. And if queen, for example, goes to e7 or f6 to stop it, my knight goes to f7 and then the rook is lost. But Sathiesh avoids everything by sending his knight to h6, controlling the f7 square, which, however, my knight will take it, and black knight takes white knight. I'm back a piece, but I know what to do. Otherwise, really, I'm a piece down. Bishop takes knight check, king takes bishop. Queen goes to h5 check, and now Sathiesh starts thinking and thinking. At some point, he even tried to put his king at e8, but immediately he realized it's an illegal move, so he placed his pawn on g6 to block the check. My queen now will take the bishop on c5, and now material is the same, but black king is out in the open and is unable to castle. That is the advantage of this opening, even if black plays correctly as the more or less did. Queen goes to e7. Now we finished the book. This is book number 9 for white, and at book number 9, what do I mean by book? Of course, it is that this is part of the opening theory, and it has been well analyzed. Queen goes to e7. Inaccuracies the computer gives me an advantage of 0.57 and wants me to exchange queens, but me being in the attack with my queen, I don't want an exchange. Instead, I check from d5. Sathiesh blocks with a queen. And what should I do? I don't want to exchange queens. I'm losing a tempo, and also I'm in the attack. Why exchange queens? So I decided to continue developing. Pawn goes to c3. Why? Blocks the knight from going to b4. If it goes to b4, it both attacks my queen on d5 and threatens a check on c2. Yes, I can stop them some. Not easy, because what can I do? Send my queen to b3. Queens are exchanged. The knight goes to c2 with a fork. That's why my pawn on c3 stops any such ideas. And no, I'm not going to be the first one to take on d4, because then the knight can also go to b4. What does Sathiesh do? Sends the rook to e8. And now I'd better be careful, because if I play something else, for example, move my bishop or a pawn or the knight, takes my queen, and I cannot take back because of the pin. And I'm suddenly down a complete queen from move number 12 from the very beginning, and the game is lost. I don't want to take any chances with my queen, so I exchange queens. At least I cannot lose my queen any longer. Yes, rook threatens the pawn at e4, but on the other side, the pawn is on d7, and the bishop and the rook are locked in their opening squares. I'm saving my pawn with sending my pawn from f2 to f3. And usually this is not a good move, because it opens some dangerous diagonals. For example, if white castles, diagonal from a7 to g1. Before that, the diagonal from h4 to e1. But black has no queen and no dark-colored bishop, so there is no reason for me to be afraid of that. Pawn goes to d6 for black. liberate the bishop. Black would be better off sending the pawn to d5. I cannot take it back to the pin, and if I don't take it back, pawn, pawn, and I lose a pawn. My only way to save the pawn is knight goes to d2, but then bishop is blocked at c1. But I got lucky, I have to say. So I had just one move of for me to castle. And now this is not an option because the pawn is not pinned. Bishop goes to d7, and my bishop goes to d2. So if pawn takes pawn, if the pawn on d4 takes pawn at c3, my bishop on d2 will take the pawn on c3, and my bishop occupies the nice long dark diagonal. For black, rook goes to e8, doubling the rooks. It's a semi-open e-file, but yes, it's semi-open, but it is closed. The pawn on f3 protects the pawn on e4, and there's not too much space yet. My knight goes to e3. Knight needs to be developed, cannot go to c3 or d2, the only remaining square. Black thinks it's an opportunity. They grab my pawn on c3, but either way or other, I was going to take it with my bishop and not my knight. So my bishop goes to c3. And yes, it is true that my knight is on the rim. And as I say, a knight on the rim is green and ready for the trim. But it's not going to stay there for too long. Black sends now his knight on e5 to block my bishop on c3, but now I can send my knight to c2, controlling the d4 square and not on the rim any longer. Black is going to send his bishop to b5 to threaten my rook on f1, rook goes to d1. Bishop goes to a4 and threatens the knight that is pinned, meaning if the knight moves, rook is lost. But I avoid it by sending my pawn to b3, and not only black must find a way to save the bishop, there are ways, but it means to spend a move doing so, but also my bishop, my c3 bishop has a much larger scope. Bishop goes to c6, is also on the long diagonal, but this diagonal is blocked by the wonderful pawn chain. I have g2, f3, e4. When the knight goes to d4, threaten the black rook at e6. I think there's only two squares to go, f6 or e7. Goes to f6, it's in the same diagonal with my bishop. Knight takes bishop, we have the exchange, and then the knight at e5 is pinned. That is why black will send their rook to e7. I want to attack the knight since there's no rook on f6, but if I do so, knight goes to g4 and is near my king. And assuming some things will disappear, meaning the two rooks and the pawn, if it disappeared, rook goes to e1, checkmate. Of course, this is not easy to happen, not even likely, but you don't want to give your opponent options, even if they're far-fetched, because a combination may come and may either make it a reality, or you may lose your chance to continue your combination because at the end there is something like that. If you're lucky, of course, and you see it on time. And to avoid this possibility, my pawn goes to h3. Bishop goes to d7. Black doesn't want to give me the option of exchanging knight with bishop. Before I had the option to exchange or not exchange, and I would do whatever would be best for me. And black doesn't, of course, want to give me this option. My rook goes to f1 to occupy the semi-open f file. If I could push my pawn to f4 and then exchange on f5, perhaps it could open a line for my rook. Pawn goes to a6. I believe that Sathie's thought was similar to mine. Avoid the knight going to b5. Yes, it's not safe for now, but you never know. Also have the chance to send the bishop to b5 without worrying about being lost to my knight. My rook goes to d1, the other semi-open file. Knight goes to c6. And Sathiesh wants to exchange knights, which I don't want yet, because I'm going to bring the bishop back to c6. Now it is quite blocked. I want to keep my knight to attack, and that's why I'm sending my knight temporarily back to e2. Knight goes to e5. My knight goes to f4 now to attack from another place, perhaps go to d5 and threaten the rooks. And if the rook goes, for example, to e6, then knight goes to c7, grab the pawn and have a fork. But the bishop goes to 6, doesn't allow me. My knight goes to e2. And at move number 27, knight goes to b5, threatens my knight, that is pinned. And Sathiesh offers me a draw. What are my options? If I save the knight with the f1 rook, whether f2 or e1, knight goes to d3, threatens my rook that has to go back to f1, and the best I can hope for is back and forth. Otherwise, if I take the knight, bishop takes my rook, and I'm exchanged down. Should I take the draw? If I'm not careful, of course, I can lose something, at least an exchange. But I decided that I'm not going to go for the draw. I take the draw only if I'm really lost, or if I play with a much higher rated player that I know that in the long term I'm going to make the mistake first. And so how do I save my knight? Computer would like me to put the king at f2. He didn't think of it. He said put my rook on d2. Still save my knight, but it's still pinned. And black sends the rook on g8. And suddenly computer thinks it's an inaccuracy and my advantage from 0 goes to 0.48. I don't think it's that bad of a move. Overprotects the pawn at g6 and perhaps might send it to g5 and start an attack along the g file. But more or less compared to what was happening, it was a kind of a waste. My rook goes to d1, my other rook. So now the knight at e2 is not pinned any longer. Bishop goes to d7. And my knight goes to f4. And bishop goes to c6, not to allow my knight to go to d5. We finished 30 moves. Computer thinks I'm ahead by 0.70. And we're continuing the game. My knight goes to d5, threatens the rook on e7. And so Sathiesh decides to exchange. He takes my knight. And the question is, how do I take it back? One needs to be careful. If you look at the computer, I have 60.65 advantage if I play the correct way, and only 0.20 if I play the second best. If I took with the pawn, I would destroy the wonderful chain of pawns. Then also the pawn at d5 is isolated, meaning no support from c and d files. Cannot be supported from a bishop that is on opposite color. The king is too far away, and then I need to use a rook to defend it. It's quite a waste to have a rook just to defend an isolated pawn. And that is why I take it with my rook. Knight goes to c6. And time for me to start pushing the pawns. There's a good chance that rooks and light pieces, meaning bishop and knight, may disappear. And then whoever has the pawns pushed as much as possible has better odds because they are near promotion. Pawn goes to a4. And black wants to safeguard his king, Sathiesh, because it's a little bit open. While squares like b8 and c8 seem to be better protected, this is what's called castling by hand, meaning the king step by step and back in the square c8 or b8 where a long castling would have placed it. My rook goes to e1. And black rook goes to f8. Now we are just juggling for position. My pawn goes to b4. Continue pushing my pawns. Rook goes to d7 for black. My rook again goes to d1. Black rook goes to f7. I'm a little bit worried about knight to e7, and to stop any such thoughts, my rook goes to, meaning if it goes to e7, it threatens my rook at d5, and that is why rook goes to d3. King goes to d8, continue the journey. My bishop goes to b5. I was expecting an exchange of pawns, but maybe Sathiesh thought that after exchange of pawns with fewer pawns, his king would be less safe, so directly sends his knight to b8. Inaccuracy says the computer, and my advantage exceeds the 1 point, is 1.32. Computer would like me now place bishop d4 and perhaps send it on a7, but I place my pawn on e5. I want to open the board since I feel like I have more space. Mistakes as a computer, and now I lose all of my advantage. If anything, black is slightly better, 0.04. Pawn on d6 takes e5. I take it back. And Sathiesh exchanges the rooks. Otherwise, he wouldn't lose anything because the rook is defended twice, but this would force him to keep his rook on the 7th rank and his knight on b8. And Sathiesh wants to exchange rooks, because if that is done, then his knight is liberated on d7, threatens my bishop, and his knight, if you look at his knight, it has nowhere to go. a6 is blocked by the pawn, c6 is controlled by my pawn on c6, on b5, and d7 is controlled by the rook. I love his knight's predicament, that's why I'm not exchanging rooks, and my rook goes to c3. So Sathiesh decides to do the exchange of the pawn. Still, his knight has nowhere to go. And he's in a tough situation, because if I could play again, my pawn goes to b6. If the pawn does not move, I win it, because I'm attacking it 3 times, defended twice. If it moves, I win the knight. What can Sathiesh do? The computer would want him to check me with the rook on d1, king goes to f4 h2, and then the knight can easily go to d7 and is liberated and threatens my bishop. He didn't think of it, I didn't think of it either, and I was expecting him to play the move that he actually played. Pawn goes from b7 to b6. And this blocks my pawn on b5, cannot move forward and threaten. What can I do now? Start activating the king. We are reaching the ending. Very few pieces remaining, meaning every side has 1 rook, 1 light piece, and 4 pawns. And 2 islands for both sides, and none of the pawns is passed. Computer didn't like it and gives me an advantage of 1.46. King goes to f2, start activating the king. Well, black continues trying to save the king, put it somewhere safe, to c8. My other pawn goes to f4, and also I support my bishop, even though currently it's not defended. King goes to b7, perhaps the safest square that Sathiesh could place his king. At least he has 2 pawns and the knight near it, and the rook, other than his 2 g6 and h7 pawns, all his other pawns and pieces are near the king. And I continue pushing my pawns. Pawn goes to g4. And Sathiesh, currently his pawn is safe because king and rook are next to that. It's attacked twice, defended twice, but this means that his king and rook are bounded. They have to stay there. And he wants to find a way to liberate his king and rook. What can he do? Of course, he can move the pawn to c6. By doing so, he gives me the option to take it. I'll not take it immediately because the knight will take it back. But what I'm going to do is take the knight takes it back, and then win the pawn. This will give me an extra pawn. But Sathiesh played a move that at that time I thought it was great, and yes, it's the best move by the computer, because it seems that he's losing something. Either he has to restrain his king and rook. How long can he do it? Start moving the pawns. If he moves the pawns, eventually I'll take them and I have a passed f pawn. But he plays another move that when I saw it, I'm not going to say it shocked me, slightly surprised me, made me feel a little uncomfortable. He moved his pawn to c5, and now what are my options? If I take the knight on b8, I cannot now take the pawn because en passant, you need to take it immediately. If I take en passant, his knight takes my pawn on c6, and if anything, he has a passed pawn on b6. As I say in English, damn if you do and damn if you don't. What should I choose? Well, yes, it's a passed pawn, but it's not even in the middle, so it's far away, while I want to continue my regular plans. I want to continue pushing my pawns, and that's why I decided, okay, let's keep it for c5, have it in my mind. Don't allow it to go too far ahead. So I'm pushing my pawn to h4. Mistakes as a computer, my advantage becomes much smaller. The computer would rather have me activate my king. Rook goes to d5. Now I send my king to e3. A move too late, perhaps. Knight goes to d7, and now my pawn is in danger, meaning if Sathiesh could move again, if black had another move, his knight would take my bishop, my pawn would take the knight, and then the rook wins the pawn. And not only that, it's very free and has a very nice position. It can go to many other squares. And that's why I stop it by placing my king on e4, and also both avoiding the loss of pawn and threatening the rook. Black cannot even start this procedure, because if his knight takes my bishop, I take the rook. If the rook takes the bishop, of course, he's going to lose the rook to my pawn. He has only two moves to play. Rook goes to either d1 to d2. He sends it to d1 and explain why, because first of all, I have a dark colored bishop, so you don't want your pieces to be in dark squares if you can help it. And also in d2, my king would go to e3, threaten the rook, and have him waste one move trying to save it. That's why he sends it to d1. I continue, my pawn goes to h5. Not sure how good was that move, because the pawn is going to get lost. Now reaching 50 moves, I have a small advantage of 0.48, as you see. At move 50, black will take my bishop, giving me quite a large advantage of 2.01, as you see. In fact, for the next move, you may wonder why these numbers are different, because the computer thinks only so many moves, and here it thinks one move more than before. And you're going to see that I have two ways to take the knight, either with the king or with the pawn, but there is almost a 10 times differential. You can take it with the pawn or with the knight, or with the king. I'm going to take it with my king, and I'm going to explain why, as the computer says, because if I take it with my pawn, then my pawn becomes isolated. Yes, it's a pass pawn. It is one square near the promotion, but that's not easy. And this is quite better for black, in fact, better compared to the alternative. I'm still ahead. Take it with the king, and the king is near the black's half. It's inside black's half, in fact, which makes it easier to support the pawns. Sathiesh decided to start the exchange of the pawns at h5, and I take it back. And Sathiesh places his rook on h1, and my pawn on h5 is lost. What can I do since a pawn is lost? Let's continue advancing the f-pawn. Sathiesh takes the pawn, and he is a pawn ahead. If you count the pawns, he has 3 versus 2 of mine. But the computer says that I'm ahead by 4.34. If I place my king to e6, my advantage becomes even larger. Becomes 4.90. And you may be wondering why is this the case? Because my pawn is very near promotion. In fact, has a free way to promotion. While black has two, yes, they have 2 passed pawns on h7 that has not even started moving, on c4 that has not even reached the center. While mine is 3 squares away, and it seems that it's unstoppable. Let's see what's going to happen. Rook goes to h1, wants to give more space to the h pawn and wants to control the f pawn from the back and also have chances to check my king from e1. My pawn goes to f6, 2 squares from promotion, and rook checks from e1. My king avoids the checks by going to f7, but while avoiding the checks, it also blocks my pawn. Black king goes to c7. The black king tries to get a better position because currently all it's doing is it's protecting the pawn on b6 and not even attack, it cannot even move. My rook goes to h3. I know I have to be very careful of the black's 2 passed pawns, the c5 and the h7. The c5, not easy to get it, protected by b6, but at least the h7 is mine. King goes to d6 for black. And now finally I get this pawn and don't have to worry about the h pawn in the future. Computer doesn't like it, decreases my advantage. Still I'm ahead, but not that much as otherwise. The computer would rather have my rook on f3 on the f file to protect my pawn f6, so I don't need to use the king for that. And I wouldn't have to worry about black rooks going to f1. And black now decides it's time to start pushing the c pawn. He cannot wait forever. It goes to c4, which the computer thinks a mistake, 4.73 advance for me, and it's a mistake if I play correctly. Otherwise, before I know it, the pawn at c4 can suddenly be promoted because there is nothing in front of it. My king is too far away to stop it. My rook would have to go, for example, to h3, then black rook can go many squares, for example, to c1 or even to b3 in 2 moves. And then really I'm in a bad shape. My king will go to g8 to clear the pawn for the promotion. And since it's not attacked, I don't have to worry that now it's not protected. Rook goes to f1 to control the pawn, otherwise the pawn promoted. And my pawn goes to f7. And king goes to c5. Why to c5 and not to e7? You may be wondering to get the pawn. Because if my pawn goes to f8, it promotes with a check. The rook cannot take it because a double check. Also, the rook from h7 checks. The king cannot take it because supported by my king. And since this case is hopeless, black is going to send his king to c5. We finish 60 moves. Computer gives me an advantage of 8.67. But I have to be very careful because my pawn on b5 is going to get lost, and the problem is not my b5 pawn per se, but the fact that then you have 2 connected pass pawns, b6 and c4 next to each other. That will be unstoppable. And that's why I must save my pawn on b5, not for the sake of the pawn, but to stop the b6 pawn of helping black. How do I do it? First check here to h5. Great move, 9.07 advantage gives the computer. King goes to b4. And at this point, I played the move that I believed was brilliant and was so proud of myself until the computer said otherwise. rook goes to h1. And you see that my advantage from 77.6 goes down to 0.39, meaning from almost sure win goes to almost a draw. Why did I do it? Because I was expecting black's move. Black does not want my pawn to be promoted, and if they took my rook, my pawn would be promoted with a check. But then my queen, black would take my pawn, and my queen would have to face rook and two connected pass pawns. Not so easy, even though the queen is 9 and rook plus 2 pawns is 7 points. But by taking my rook, that's what I was expecting. But instead, what black did is they took my pawn on f7. Black thought I'm going to take the rook. Black will take my pawn. And then the connected two pawns are extremely powerful, especially my king being so far away. Computer says a blunder, so back again I have 47.2 advantage, but only if I play correctly. And the correct move is rook goes to b1 check. By doing so, I save my pawn. Great move, 55.1. And king goes to c5. Now my pawn is safe. And only now I take the rook. And computer says another great move. I'm 26 moves from 8. Of course, at the time I had no idea to know it. It's impossible to calculate 26 moves ahead of time. It's not a theoretical position that even if you cannot calculate everything, you know you're going to win. For example, bishop and knight and king versus king is a win. You know it will win. You cannot calculate how many moves, but it's theory and you know it. Now we can even go to table base. If there are 7 or fewer pieces remaining, there is a complete database that shows you exactly which side is winning or if it's a draw and how to reach the result. If I click the table base, I'm going later to go back to analysis, but I'm going to show how it works. It says white wins and shows you exactly how to play depending how black reacts. But we're going to the analysis because first I had no access to this database during the game, and second, to memorize what is in this database is virtually impossible. We'll continue the way that humans, or at least computer programs, thinks. Pawn goes to c3. What is black's now hope? To promote the pawn. If the pawn promotes, black might be able to win. What is my hope? Bring the king as near as possible. If I have to change rook for the pawn, at least if the king takes the b6 pawn, the b5 can promote. King goes to d4, they cannot just push it because my rook here will go to c2 and take it. My king goes to d6. King goes to d3. And now, how do I win it? At that time, I saw exactly how to win. Until the end, there are many ways to do it. But I set my rook to b3. Why? The pawn is pinned. The c3 pawn is pinned. And no matter what black does with his king, I take the pawn, lose my rook, and then my king goes to c6 and wins the pawn. So black decides to threaten my rook, but I knew that I was going to lose this rook, and this would lead me to win. I take it, and now black knows that if they take my rook, the game is over because my king will go to c6, the black king will go b4 or c4, then I take the pawn, and with the king in front of my pawn will go to a5 and push it. So they decided to see if they had any luck if they took the pawn instead. Rook versus pawn, especially if the pawn is near promotion, is not easy win. Many times it may end up in a draw. It's rare for the rook to lose because worst to come to worst, they can sacrifice the pawn. But this pawn on b6 is too far away from promotion. So my rook will go to b3 to check. And black has what other options? If they go to a4, c4, I want the pawn, I'm winning. So they decided to go to a5. And now my king, the same thing would happen if the king would go to a6. My king goes to c6, and no matter what black does, they lose the pawn. If the king goes to a6, I'll take it, and with my no matter what they do, my next move is rook goes to b6. There is no hope for stalemate, and thus at move number 70, the game is over. This concludes my game with Sathiesh Arunagiri, round number 5. So at this point, I have 3 wins and 2 losses. It was a very exciting, dynamic game. My opponent played quite well. Sathiesh, congratulations, you played quite well as possible. And let's see what the computer has to say. Let's see what is the review. It was, I would say, quite a difficult game for me that, as you see, it was won in just 1 move differential. And I could have been a draw if the rook would have taken my rook instead of stopping my pawn from promotion. 87.3 accuracy for me, 83.7 for my opponent. Ratings, 2350 for me, 2200 for Sathiesh. No brilliances. I had 5 great moves versus 2 for Sathiesh, 23 best for me versus 20 for Sathiesh, 3 mistakes for me, 6 for Sathiesh. I had 2 misses, and Sathiesh had 1 blunder. I believe it is when he took my pawn on f7 to avoid promoting instead of taking my rook on h1. This concludes my coverage of round number 5, as I mentioned. 3 wins, 2 losses. I know that worst come to worst, at least I'll have as many wins as losses. Round number 6 was going to start in a few hours, not too much ahead of that. This game lasted quite a long time, I think more than 3 hours definitely. So I had about a couple of hours of rest. For the next round, 3 wins, 2 losses until now. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for viewing these videos. Thanks to the subscribers and the people that click the like button. And some of you have left some nice comments. I am Sathiesh Arunagiri. This is my grecochess YouTube channel. The next video is going to be round number 6, my last game in the New York State Championship. For now, Sathiesh Arunagiri, grecochess, goodbye.